Welcome to Personality Crisis. I am Dylan Riss, your host for this episode, and we are very lucky to be joined by the New York correspondent for Haaretz, which is Israel's oldest daily newspaper. Let's please welcome Etan Nechin to the show. Etan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Etan, you are an Israeli who lives and reports in New York. How long have you been a New York resident?
I've been a New York resident since 2011, and I was freelancing for many publications before, becoming full-time with Haaretz in the past couple of years.
In the U.S., Haaretz is often thought of as, at least from an editorial perspective, of representing more of the left side of Israeli politics. Is that a fair way to assess it, or is that not the way that you all would describe it?
I think it's a fair way. I think Haaretz has a more liberal left leaning, especially in the opinion pages. Mostly does a lot of investigational reporting, a lot of reporting about what's going on in the West Bank, Gaza, and the region. And as it pertains to reporting from the United States, it has a very, shall I say, Israeli perspective on things. So beyond left and right, we give a perspective of Israelis looking at the situation either from Israel or from here.
And so that raises the question of what is the broader Israeli perspective? Here in the U.S., a lot of people who don't live here, they might look at the U.S. broadly and think, "Oh, it's a nation full of Trump-loving right-wingers." When, of course, anyone who lives in America knows it's much more complex than that. And likewise, when people in the United States who might not be as continually attuned to world affairs look at Israel, they think, wow, this has become a right-wing country under the Netanyahu alliance. This is what Israel is, and that its new personality is one of constant aggression toward Gaza, West Bank. How accurate is that perception, and what more do Americans need to know?
Well, I think it's first, it's very accurate, but it's also very complex in that manner. I think it's true. Israel has become an aggressor. Its brazenness in the past few years. I think anybody with an iPhone can see what it has done since October 7th. And even before in the region. I think over the past few decades as well, with the erosion of any peace process, of the Palestinian becoming a back issue in Israeli society and in American politics, I have to say. Israel's political sphere and also its public sphere has become more right-wing, has less aspirations to normalize relationship with the Palestinians, and are okay with continuation of annexing the West Bank, of rounds we had with Hamas, and now we saw only yesterday another new round with Iran. So there's a new normalization of this Israel and as an aggressor, and especially a force that doesn't seek a way out, seek any vision for the after these rounds of war. But I think what's more, I know maybe complex is a wrong word, but as in any society, which is highly militarized and has been ongoing war for years, Israel is made up out of very distinct social, economic, educational classes that have been competing with each other. And we're seeing also that is part of the change that's going on in Israel in the past decades. if once the elites and the ruling classes were mostly from Ashkenazi, mostly very secular, more liberal leaning, we saw under Netanyahu, who's been in the prime minister seats for 17 years, a reversal and a change towards more religious, more right wing, more nationalists coalition that has been taking over institution and kind of, making it in its image. So after 17 years of Netanyahu's coalition, we're seeing actual change in the media, in the military, in the courts, and of course in the Knesset.
Yes, and you've mentioned that change, and you of course mentioned October 7th, which was a major inflection point. But you also mentioned how goes before October 7th. I believe Netanyahu's first term was 1996. He first took power,
Yeah.
And that of course was after one of the more liberal, dovish prime ministers in Israeli history, Yitzak Rabin, was assassinated by a right winger. So it does seem that maybe we're sort of seeing the crest of a wave that goes back to the mid 90s. Is that accurate, or is that oversimplifying?
I think that's very accurate. I think Rabin was assassinated for one reason only. It was to strive for normalization with Palestinians. And people have disagreements of whether Oslo would have led to a real state or not, or degraded state. That may be the case, but there's no, the only reason was that he was striving for peace and normalization with Palestinians, which was, his assassination was incited by Netanyahu as opposition leader, and by figures like Ben Gvir, who has been convicted on terror support, who incited against Rabin, and is now the minister in charge of the police. So I think that in that regard, there's a through line of, Rabin's government's strive for peace, his assassination, and October 7th, and what we're seeing today. I think it's total. I think perhaps Rabin was probably one of the maybe Franz Ferdinand and Rabin were probably one of the most consequential assassinations in 20th century history and politics.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that assassination and what Hamas did on October 7th is in both cases you had extremist factions that were kind of trying to provoke Israel, the Israeli public, right? Not just the government, but like by politics to take on this right-wing militaristic posture, right? Because, Hamas surely knew something was going to come from October 7th. And in a way, it seems that Israel took the bait and became the agitator on the world stage that Hamas was kind of hoping. Is that
that's very fair. And one more thing about the 90s, the same forces that, that led to the failing of Oslo was not only Netanyahu and Ben Gvir, it was Hamas, who were blowing up buses in the middle of Tel Aviv. Their goal was an anti-PLO stance, was, again, PLO recognized Israel as state. Arafat was publicly, in the White House, shaking Rabin's hand. Hamas is a extreme Islamist movement that any sense of normalization with Israel, is beyond the pale. So I think the same power that instigated Oslo's failure and Israel's right-wing turn also, are responsible for October 7th and the aftermath. I think as much as Israel became this picture of aggression, Hamas leadership knew this. They knew this would trigger an unprecedented response from Israel. And for them, any sacrifice, any death toll for Palestinians is is little compared to their messianic aims. And this was stated after October 7th by their leaders. And their leaders vowed to do October 7th again and again, because their goal isn't to create a normalized state of Palestinians, but it is, I think, like in Israel, there was a messianic turn also in Hamas's leadership in the past few years. October 7th was the prime example.
Yes, and I think that that's an important thing for American audiences who might be appalled by Israel's military actions to keep in mind that that the other side is also being led by extremists, at least the Hamas wing that continues to dominate.
I mean, this was Israel's strategy as well, to prop up Hamas in Gaza, in order to divide between Gaza and the West Bank, to weaken the Palestinian Authority. This is why Israel allowed Qatari money to flow into the Gaza Strip for years, as again another settler leader who was, during the 2005 withdrawal from Gaza, arrested because he stole 700 liters of gasoline, allegedly to burn Ayalon Highway, which is the main artery. Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister, who in 2017 or 2018 said Hamas is an asset. Hamas is an asset to the Israeli right wing, and vice versa. So this October 7th and its aftermath is a direct result of these policies that have been governing Israel and Palestine for the past 2 decades.
It's Orwellian, isn't it? It's just like the war. The war is good for people in power, so let's just keep it going.
I mean, this is, I think, perhaps this is, a lot of people in Israel maybe also aren't deeply aware about. This is a messianic goal also for Hamas, but also for Israeli settlers. The Israeli state isn't the goal itself. The goal is to usher the Messiah, usher in of days. The state is a tool for that. A whole expansion into Israel biblical promise, while degrading and erasing the pesky peoples in the region, is the very, very explicit goal of the Israeli settler movement, which has not only expanded in territory, but now is in the cabinet, and it's in the media, and it's in the military. It's a 4-decade project that has come to fruition, and it's not going anywhere anytime soon.
And let's sort of dig into that, that idea that it's foretold by the Bible or the Old Testament that the Jewish people must have their own state, and it's specifically in this land, right? Because there's many things that have gotten interwoven into like one axiomatic truth, right? That's like, after the Holocaust, Jewish people need their own state because they're being murdered by other governments. That's one premise that came out of it that seemed to be pretty well agreed upon in the 40s, But then there's a second thing about, it has to be in this ancestral homeland where other people were living. Maybe they took that by violent means or whatever. But there's sort of these two clashes, right, about like protection of the Jewish people, but then this specific plot of land. And it seems that those two are at odds.
Yeah, I think, well, this is, before the Holocaust, it's in the end of the 19th century was both the rise of nation states, of nationalism around Europe and around the world, and with the rise of anti-Semitism, political anti-Semitism, that popular politics and parties are aligned not only around policy about housing and voting rights, but also anti-Semitism. And we're seeing that around Eastern Europe especially. So there is a debate in the Jewish community, and Jewish communities, around how to address this. There were party that there were Orthodox Haredi communities that we're anti-Zionist. We're not striving towards a nation state because that's not in interpretation of the Torah. It's God's will, and it's not something we are actively striving for. There's groups like the Bund, who are Jews who insisted on staying in Europe and living as a Jewish entity within these societies, not to assimilate, but to have protection of minorities, to have their own education system in Yiddish, but to stay and be part of these societies. And then there was the Zionist group, which very quickly saw the only means as to establish a home state. In the first, it was talked about maybe going to Uganda or maybe a land in Wisconsin, but very quickly it was Israel or Palestine, even Ottoman Palestine, because of this biblical affiliation. And these were not religious Jews; these were mostly secular Jews who came from the religious world but left it. But they still saw the most natural place for the Jewish people is in this biblical homeland. This in turn created the Palestinian question or the Palestinian problem, which, a lot of the history is erased or underwritten about. But yes, I mean, since the Zionists began buying land during the Ottoman period, there was resistance from the local communities. So this conflict, this struggle has been going on since the late 1880s, and it's still the basic conflict, right? It's a community that has been on this land for hundreds of years, in conflict with a people that believe that this in part is their own land. So this is new, and we're seeing manifestations after the foundation of Israel, but also it's been way before.
So, taking that to the present day, what would, if you could encapsulate the perspective of the Israeli right, led by the Netanyahu coalition, and then the left or center left, resistance to that, what are sort of the prevailing positions for what should happen to Palestinian people?
Well, on the right, on the more right edge with Ben Gvir and Smotrich, we're seeing what's, I think, again, Smotrich, I think in 2017 or 18, wrote a plan of total victory over the Palestinian, that they will be so defeated that the idea of a state would be so far-fetched that most of them will leave, and those who will stay will just be under Israeli auspices as, second or third class citizens.
And by leaving, you mean they'd move to Jordan or Egypt?
Move to wherever, Somaliland or Pakistan, or we're seeing this in manifestation of, plans after October 7th of plans to move or for Palestinians to voluntarily immigrate to Somaliland. Plan that were, the governments themselves local governments were appalled by, or Indonesia, or
right.
So that we're seeing on the kind of more extreme edge right wing, and then there's a gamut of between Netanyahu and Naftali Bennett, who's former prime minister, who's also religious right, less extreme from Smotrich and Ben Gvir, but also in that camp, and that's managing the occupation. And we're seeing that in the past, this strategy in the past 2 decades. minimizing casualties as much as they can for Israeli population. For Palestinians, it doesn't really matter. 2022, under when Bennett was prime minister, it was the bloodiest year for Palestinians in West Bank, obviously before October 7th. So this is basically making the occupation hurt as least to Israelis as possible. We saw that with the erection of the separation walls, and after the withdrawal from Gaza, we're seeing that with expansion of what so-called farms in the West Bank of these, 2, 3, 4 settlers who just show up near a Palestinian village, set up an encampment there, and then the army comes, and that's how slowly there's a de facto annexation. And
Yeah, how
this is
does that
kind of
annexation work? Do they if they see someone's property, do they pay them for it, or they just
no,
truly
they
kick them
just
out?
show up. Then they, a lot of them now openly try to cause stir violence. The army showed up, addressed the Palestinians. Slowly, the Palestinian communities give up. I think since October 7, around 40 communities, Palestinians left their villages. We're seeing that with water. We're seeing settlers basically siphoning water off private Palestinian land. So Palestinian farmers don't have water. We're seeing that with land. The army will announce, this area is now under military control. This could be Palestinian farms. And again, this kind of slowly, nothing announced, but with every year, there's a deeper annexation of the West Bank. And that's been kind of the managing the occupation strategy. And obviously in Gaza, we saw that in the past 10 years. Every 2 years, there's another quote unquote round with Hamas. Hamas throws rockets, Israel responds. And throughout, the people of the South are bombarded with these rockets that make life kind of unlivable, but it's okay with the Israeli government.
Yeah.
Um,
Now, is there a left wing perspective on what should happen?
I think the left in this point is pretty much degraded to a point where it has no political vision. It is only reacting to, things that are happening. And we're seeing that with the rise of these quote unquote center parties that replace old labor and old left, that again have their own variations of managing the conflict or managing the occupation. Um, talking about maybe perhaps in the future there could be something with the Palestinians, but not now, and maybe later, but not a state. And there's always a ceding towards the sense of personal safety and security for Israelis over a vision, like a political vision for total separation and a Palestinian state. So this has kind of also been the fault of the left, that they've been basically trapped into the right wing's narrative, which was ironically started by and kind of Israeli public law was started by Ehud Barak after the failure of Camp David in 2000, where he said there is no partner for peace. And the right kind of jumped at it, and their liberal left basically been, following that tune ever since.
You know, what's interesting, again, from a U.S. perspective, is sort of what you've said, that the left has in some cases crumbled there. In the U.S., what someone might say is, well, the right wing has been radicalized under Trump and various people around him, but then the left has gotten more left wing. Not to make a false
Yeah,
comparison like the
yeah,
yeah, would be satirized in a New York Times pitchbot tweet, but
yeah,
the point is that that the that indeed on the American left there actually is more leftist ideology. in Israel, what you see is that some of the people leading the resistance were once thought of as at least centrist, if not right wingers. I think back to someone like Ariel Sharon, who was not thought to be left winger, and then he became comparatively left wing. Right now, I guess the sort of left wing leader, so to speak, would be Yair Lapid, who wasn't thought of as left,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Well, I think it's also, first of all, it was the right wing's paradigm that the left is trapped in. And also, in the past year, we've seen Netanyahu as this kind of um, central narrative around him. We saw before October 7th, 4 election cycles in 5 years. And this was all around the question, yes or no Netanyahu. So suddenly you have somebody like Lieberman, who is very right wing, joins forces with Meretz, which was traditionally the Israeli flagship, like left wing anti-occupation party. So the whole politics now is centered around Netanyahu and his personality and people's urge to unseat him, which haven't been successful yet.
Let's talk about Netanyahu himself. Is he a true believer, or is he a cynic who will just, make an alliance with anybody to stay in power and presumably out of prison?
Yeah.
Where does he fall on that spectrum?
Well, first of all, I think he is a cynic, and his personality. I think he's a real Machiavellian figure, and always has been. And people, I think, tend to confuse that with lack of ideology. Netanyahu is the son of a very right-wing historian, who wrote a huge encyclopedia about the Spanish Inquisition. And he was Jabotinsky's personal secretary. This is a very right-wing father and very right-wing lineage. Netanyahu, as a son of a historian, has, and as an avid reader of history, has a sense of history and legacy. And he does see himself as a historical figure of the right who will ensure Israel's safety, crush Iran, and make Israel a mighty power in the region. So he is a true believer, I think, in that sense, and he's a very, very right-wing ideologue in that sense, and that's masqueraded, because of cynicism, is corruption, is greediness, is vulgarity and megalomania.
Yeah, and yet he can sometimes, his image can be relatively moderated because there are people to the right of him who are mad at him that he might even go along with any sort of ceasefire when they want him to just keep attacking in Lebanon or Iran. Correct?
Yeah. Well, I think that's a politician. I think he's perhaps more than anything in Israel, he's the first true politician Israel ever had, kind of a career politician, which unsurprisingly he learned here. I mean, he basically grew up here. He studied here. He was, represented at the UN. So he really took that Reaganist kind of Republican 80s persona and kind of copy pasted it like to Israeli settings. So in that sense, appearing more moderate in time, more extreme sometimes, that's his kind of political showmanship. And that's what, actually made him survive this long. And a country and a politics that will like devour you in a second because of all these political, ethnic, tribal, religious, secular divisions. He's managed to really, outlast everybody.
So in the past, he was, as you just said, manipulating the election process by holding 4 and 5 years to, strategically entrench himself. Now he's been doing the opposite, delaying an election for as long as possible. But this year he does have to face the voters. When is that election, and what should we know about it?
The election will be in October, probably. That wasn't set yet. Set the date. It will be. I mean, it's funny. I think will be the second government that ever finished its term in Israel because politics is so volatile. Um, Government usually dissolve. So to think of a government that before October 7th, millions took to the street against its judicial overhaul, a government that is responsible for October 7th, which, in one single day, 1,200 Israelis died, and southern since been displaced. Israel is a pariah state in many countries today. That it will survive its term is a testament to Netanyahu's sheer political strategy, and also, um, part of this strategy is also that this seems, I mean, at least I don't really know, but it will be less about October 7th in a referendum than about other issues like drafting Orthodox Haredi communities into the army, which now Netanyahu is trying to make some sort of deal with them to make them exempt, while the liberal parties, that's what they're running on. So even, a disastrous, the most catastrophic event in Israel history, will be, and probably kind of the second, third issue in this elections.
Hmm. And if you had to bet your own money on what's going to happen, um, what parties and politicians are going to prevail?
Well, now there's Netanyahu and his Orthodox and settler bloc, which is kind of has a it has a fixed ceiling, which Knesset has 120 seats. It has probably between 54, 55 max. Then you have all the other parties, which is a mix of liberal, right, soft right, soft left, and then Arab-led parties. Currently, the Jewish liberal right and left don't have a majority. That means that they will need to rely on Arab-led parties, which, I mean, the previous government of Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid sat with Ram, which is an Islamist party, but not very ideological on Palestine. It's much more internal Arab society in Israel. So basically, what Netanyahu needs to do is play for a stalemate, or make the liberal to right and left contend with sitting with another Arab party. So it's hard to predict what will happen, but I don't see any real change happening or any long-lasting change. There could be this, patchy coalition of Bennett, Lapid, Lieberman, Ram again, Yair Golan, Eisenkot, who was the general chief of staff, creating this coalition. How long would it last? Bennett and Lapid's coalition lasted around a year and a half or two. I mean, that would be kind of the optimal. That would be probably the most, realistic result. And then we'll see, if Netanyahu is still waiting in the wings or there'll be a change, in right-wing leadership after.
So you think that would be a more likely outcome than Netanyahu somehow letting the others divide themselves and getting to form yet another government?
I mean, he's is the master of it, and I think if there is one politician who could do it, it's Netanyahu. So I wouldn't put it past it. It seems more likely now that Eisenkot / Bennett / Lapid / Yair Golan / Lieberman, with the backing of our party, would build the coalition. But you never know until election day.
Well, that I think is a good sort of stopping point, because you've already agreed to join us for another episode, and this was sort of a look at inside Israel's current political system from sort of a high level, and I'd love to have you back to talk a little bit about how that might impact the rest of the world, the Jewish diaspora and America, whether you're Jewish or any other religion. So thank you,
Sure.
Etan Nechin, for joining us, and thank you in addition for agreeing to come back. So
Mm.
we'll see you on the next episode of Personality Crisis.
Thank you very much.